started off as a PG podcast, but then Devin just kept on dropping shits and fucks, and now...
That's right. We are live.
The ghost faced himself, Brandon Tanev.
This isn't like the start of last season when it looked like the Canucks were just a beer league team not playing defense at all. And just before Chris goes, no, I'm kidding, Chris. You can actually go now.
no, hold on.
We had to give more time for coming on late. So.
I still had. Hold on. All right, Chris, go, and then I got something else to say at the end.
So an elf and a midget in 2 back-to-back games. He's definitely on a friendship tour for sure.
Saying, oh yeah, I'm okay with him being, the 6'7" defenseman. No. He is a AHL defenseman right now.
Look, Chunky, don't mind Devin, okay? We all struggle with Devin, so you know.
Well, hello there, and welcome to the Shifts and Pucks podcast. Of course, you can follow us on Twitter at Shifts and Pucks, Facebook.com Shifts and Pucks, YouTube.com Shifts and Pucks, Twitch.com Shifts and Pucks. Subscribe wherever you get your audio, as well as, of course, we're also on the Area 51 Sports Network, as we are now just 4 days away from the first in-person draft in 3 years, as we are heading, but some of us are heading to Montreal to attend the draft, which is going to be a very interesting draft on a number of different occasions. Lots of questions here about the draft. And to get you primed and set up, we have from Future Considerations, the one, the only, Derek Neumeier joining us. Derek, thank you for joining us. It's been a long time. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me back. I think this is the third time I've sat down with you guys, and I'm glad you're able to squeeze this in. I am also one of those people that's headed off to Montreal soon. I fly out on Wednesday morning for the draft. My credentials have been approved, so I will be there behind the scenes, soaking in the experience. There's really nothing quite like it.
I imagine that this is like, just because of the last 3 years, just the whole excitement around just getting everybody actually together is just probably the biggest, most refreshing story out of all of this. It's about the players, obviously, but even for the players, I remember when Tyler and I went when the draft was in Vancouver, just watching the players and the parents having like that moment of crossing the stage and being there. I think that's like for everybody. I think that an in-person draft is just so much better. Thank you, Captain Obvious.
It really is. It's just a special atmosphere. There's really nothing quite like it. You got all these talented young players and their families, and their lives are about to change significantly in some cases. And to get to see the look on their face, to see them shaking the hands of their GMs and putting on that sweater and just kind of being there for that special moment, it's pretty cool. And this year is going to be unparalleled to a certain degree. In Montreal, which is, the mecca of hockey, and the Habs are going to be picking first, which is, that doesn't happen very often at all. And the fact that it's happening in Montreal is just extra special. That city with its history with hockey. And after a couple of years of a pandemic, a couple of years of no in-person draft, it's going to be a very interesting, special experience. I'm excited to be there in person, and I'm sure even just watching it live, you'll be able to feel that energy coming through your screens.
Yes. Well, let's go there.
I didn't even register to me that it's in Montreal and Montreal's picking first. Like you saying that now, just like, holy crap! That is ridiculous.
Yeah, that'll be a very memorable experience for the actual Habs fans are there. I don't have a stake in the game. I don't care who goes first overall personally, but if you're a Habs fan and you get tickets, that'll be pretty cool. Very, very, very cool.
Yeah. So let's start there, because there has been some all throughout this for the last 2 years. The name Shane Wright was expected to be the number 1 pick. And then Chris Peters, I think Chris Peters was one of the first that put Logan Cooley as number 1 on his draft board. And then the Bob father, Bob McKenzie, put Yuri Slafkovsky as number 1. Let's start with I'm going to just make this a simple question here. Is there any chance that Shane Wright does not go number 1?
Yes. I don't I wouldn't say it's as high of a chance as it might have been made out to be over the last little bit. I think I'd give Shane Wright probably 80 to 20 odds of going first overall if I were just to give my gut feeling. I mean, there's no harm in what Montreal is doing, playing it safe. Obviously, they don't want to say anything. They got to keep a little bit of a surprise for their fans. And I'm sure they've watched just endless amounts of tape of Slavkovsky and Cooley and probably even Simon Nemec and David Jurček just to be safe. But for my money and for most scouts' money, Shane Wright's still the guy. There's nothing to say. Let's not say anything bad about Slavkovsky or Cooley. They're both very, very good players, and they genuinely did close the gap quite a lot this season. But there's just something about Wright as a star player that you can kind of bank on. Maybe he's not going to be the highest point producer. Maybe he's not going to be a guy who shows up a lot in highlights, but he's just so effective at what he does. He's such a difference maker. There's almost like a safety to him that I don't know you get out of Slavkovsky. Slavkovsky is the exciting pick. He's bigger, he's faster than Wright. He can do things at high speeds that Wright can't. So there's certainly something to be said about the appeal there. But if we're looking at this draft and where that Montreal Canadiens are and what they need, I think Wright is the pick that makes the most sense. There goes my dog, sorry. Amazon. Montreal is a tough place to play. It's a really diehard fan base, a really aggressive media. There's a bright spotlight in that city. And I think to a certain degree, with a pick this high, you need a guy who you can trust to handle that. And Shane Wright has that. He's been a top player in his age group forever. He was the exceptional pick, got to play in the OHL early. He was the projected first rounder. He starred for Team Canada as an underage player. This guy doesn't, he doesn't get fazed by pressure or spotlights. He's able to do a lot of work when all eyes are on him. And I think that is something that will probably play into the picture for the Canadiens. But even just in a team building standpoint, it certainly doesn't hurt. They've got good young players with Nick Suzuki and Cole Caulfield, but they don't have someone quite like Wright. He just brings a different kind of element. So does Slavkovsky, but generally nowadays teams are built through the middle first and foremost. So if you have Nick Suzuki as one of your top two centers and Shane Wright as your other top two center, I think that's a great place to kind of build a foundation for a team, more so than adding a left winger like Slavkovsky.
Now, we talked about the bubble and all of this. There's two things that I'm wondering about with Shane Wright. One, Kent Hughes was asked about today, but I just wonder with COVID and the delay and the year off, how did that hurt Shane Wright?
It seems like it did. He just wasn't quite as effective at the start of this year as he was before things shut down. He just seemed like there was something missing to his game. You could call it rust if you want, but he just wasn't quite as effective. His timing was a little bit off. Maybe he was a little bit slower and maybe his conditioning wasn't quite there. He would stop moving his feet a little bit too often at times. But over this course of the season, he really did pick things up. And it wasn't always an easy situation for him either. He was relied on a lot by that Kingston team. He took heavy minutes. He had tough matchups. With his pedigree, he was a guy that other teams focused on shutting down right away. And for long stretches of the season, there wasn't a lot of solid talent around him. The team got stronger and deeper by the end of the season, which helped. And he actually saw his numbers tick up and his overall play ticked up. So I think that would have to be factored into the equation a little bit. Slavkovsky played more last year than Wright did. Logan Cooley played more. So maybe there was a little bit of rust that had to be shaken off. But, you got to look at the big picture. You got to look at where these players are going to be in 3 years or 5 years or 10 years. And there is still the argument that maybe Slavkovsky, just because he's got such raw potential, maybe he does take off. Maybe his trajectory ends him up a little bit higher than Shane Wright. I won't be surprised if that happens, but there's a certain amount of safety to the Shane Wright pick. And sometimes I wonder if people are almost overthinking it a little. Wright's been on the scene for so long. Everyone's seen him so many times. You maybe start to pick his game apart a little more than you should. Whereas someone like Slavkovsky and to a lesser degree Cooley, they're a little bit more fresh in people's eyes and a little bit more exciting to watch right now because there's a little bit of newness to them, even though they both have been top prospects for a long time as well.
Yeah.
What's the difference between Shane Wright and Logan Cooley? They're both centers. So if you're building up the middle, what would be the difference between those two if you're Montreal picking first overall?
They're pretty different players in a lot of ways. Wright is bigger, stronger. He can play a little bit more of a power game. He's not going to be a big bruiser or anything, but he can cycle well. He can fend off checks. You can handle it when guys are draped all over him. He's got a better shot overall, and I think he's a solid defensive player. Cooley's good defensively too, but not quite as good as Wright. Cooley's a little bit quicker, a little bit smoother with the puck. I think he's got a little bit better playmaking vision. I like his pace more. I like his motor more. But he's one of those smaller centers. He's more like someone like a Suzuki or a Clayton Keller, where they're moving their feet a lot. They're scanning the ice really well. They're threading passes around. They're the type of players who can make their line mates better and feed them the puck a lot, but they don't quite have as much of an all-around package to work with. Whereas Shane Wright doesn't really have any noticeable weaknesses. Cooley's a guy who's better off the rush. You can play the cycle well. He's hard to pin down. He's really evasive. They're both very good players. But even though they are centers, there are some differences to what they bring to the table.
In terms of where Wright plays next year, what if you had an opportunity to sit down with Canadiens management, what would you recommend?
That's a good question. I think a lot of people are expecting Wright to jump right into the Montreal roster next season. I'd be a little hesitant about it. Honestly, it's hard for me to say definitively. I would probably lean towards that 9-game tryout and just kind of see where things go. I think you have to have him on your roster, at least at the start, but see how he plays. His pace isn't the best. It's not a strong suit to him. And the NHL is a fast league. You really got to have high conditioning and the ability to handle, going full speed all of your shifts. That's not something that Wright really excels at right now. And I don't think his skating in straight lines and in bursts is quite good enough to kind of make up for a lack of pace at times. So it's hard to say. I mean, he's really smart. He's really responsible. I don't think he would burn the Habs if he was on the roster. He might not score a lot of goals or points, but he probably wouldn't give up a lot either. He wouldn't be a liability. But then it begs the question if that's really the right place for him. If you have him on the team and he's kind of limited to a bottom 6 role, maybe playing 12 to 14 minutes a night. He's not scoring a lot. He's not playing a lot on special teams. I mean, you can make the argument that would be worse for his long-term development than going back to junior. He did miss one whole year of OHL hockey. So, maybe him going back and just torching the OHL with Kingston for another season, that might be the best thing for him. There are things in his game that could be worked on. And you got to worry again about that pressure. There's a lot of pressure in Montreal, especially on whoever they're going to pick first overall. If Wright comes in and they keep him, by game 20 or 30, he's playing terribly. That could be hard on his confidence. It could be a tough spot to be in. And it's not like teams need to have their first overall pick in the NHL. I mean, if you could even just last year, Owen Power went back to college. There's almost like a bit of a precedent set that you don't have to rush guys if you don't think it's the right move. But honestly, it's still hard for me to say. Wright's a smart player. He's really adaptable. Maybe Montreal keeps him up at the start of the year and through 9 games, he looks right at home. It wouldn't surprise me. But I wouldn't lean one way or the other too strongly right now. I think you'd have to kind of see where things go and how he does at the start of the season before you could really make a confident decision.
Yeah. I think that's the big question of what you do with Shane Wright, because I think there was so much expectations, and then you're right, he's putting on that red, white, and blue Montreal Canadiens jersey. There's an instant amount of pressure on that too. I think that's going to be fascinating to me to watch there.
And you all, sorry to say one more
No.
thing on that. You kind of saw how things can go wrong in that sort of way with Jesperi Kotkaniemi with Montreal the last, and how things ended with him there. He had a great rookie season. He looked okay. He looked like he fit, and then things just really went sideways. He got traded to Carolina. Carolina offer sheeted him, but Montreal didn't fight too hard to keep him. They let him go. So it can go sideways. You do have to be careful sometimes about putting a player in the NHL too soon.
Yeah. Well, Cole Caulfield even had it was up and down. Like, he got off to that great start in the bubble, and then he had a rough start in the first half, and then when Martin St. Louis took over, it got better for him. But that's another example of another guy that, yeah. So just okay, and then I just want to ask about Slafkovsky, because there's some in the Vancouver world that is either praying, hoping, or expecting JT Miller to be traded for the number 2 pick in New Jersey. So with Slafkovsky, what you talked a little bit about him, but what does he start in the NHL, or what would you expect from him, either wherever he plays, whether it's New Jersey or if they trade that pick?
It's the same sort of scenario. I think he's someone who could crack an NHL roster and not look out of place. He's certainly got the physical body for it. He's strong enough. He's fast enough to keep up with the speed of the NHL. He's a great skater. He has a ton of power. He's got long stride length. Like, he just moves around the ice really well. And we've already seen him a lot against older competition. Now, his time in the top Finnish Pro League was hit or miss. Stronger at the back end of the season, not so good at the start. But, there was progression that was made there. But he looked great internationally. He was great at the Olympics. He was great at the World Championships, playing against some NHL competition. Not entirely NHL competition, but some. So we've already kind of seen what he can do against that kind of talent. If he goes number 2 to New Jersey and they put him in their roster, put him on a line with, Jack Hughes or Nico Hischier, I wouldn't be surprised at all if he is great and he holds his own for the whole season. They have 2 solid centers that he can play with. They could, and they're a young team. Their expectations are low. Every team wants to win, but if New Jersey struggles and there are some growing pains for Slafkovsky, I don't think anyone would be too upset or surprised by it. So I wouldn't be surprised if it happens. New Jersey, I think they're trying to go a little bit bigger right now. It seems like they're antsy for something. Like, they're trying to make a bit of a splash. They're showing up in a lot of trade rumors and stuff, talking about possibly entertaining a trade for the 2nd overall pick. So I wouldn't be surprised if they wanted to keep Slafkovsky around just to kind of bring back some of that excitement to the fan base. There's a great fan base in New Jersey, but over the last few years, the team hasn't been great. They haven't had a whole ton to cheer for, aside from getting high draft picks. So I think the idea of, getting Slafkovsky in there right away and putting him right next to Hughes or Hischier and just letting them, build that chemistry early on, it seems pretty appealing.
Sorry, Sean, were you going to say something, or?
No, is there a chance? I would say, is there a chance that it's like, Slafkovsky has does Slafkovsky have the option to go to the AHL? Or is he basically NHL or Finnish league?
I think he could go AHL. He should be able to go AHL because it's only the CHL that has that transfer agreement with the NHL. So I'm pretty sure he could. He doesn't have any ties to the CHL right now, so he should be able to play in the AHL if he wanted to. Alexander Holtz, I think, went straight to the AHL, and he's in the New Jersey system. Came over out of Sweden, so I think that would be fine. I'm no CBA expert, but I'm pretty sure that would be the case.
And then, so the next 2 defensemen that are commonly picked are Simon Nemec and David Juracek. Nemec from Slovakia, Juracek from the Czechs. Who do you have ahead, and what do you like about both of those guys?
It's kind of funny how close they are. They're both talented right shot defensemen, constantly ranked side by side in draft boards. Not everywhere, but in most places. And there's a lot to like about both, in some small differences between them. Nemec is a little bit smoother. I find him a little bit more well-rounded, a little bit more consistent. The fine details to his game, I think, are a little bit stronger. He's a little more consistent, I find, at driving possession and being in the right place positionally and just making the correct reads. He's safe in kind of a sense. I mean, his defending could take some strides. He's more of an offensive guy now, but there's a lot of upside to him as a defensive player. I think he's going to be very well-rounded and all situations type of defenseman once he, hits his prime. Juracek is a little bit more exciting in some ways. He's bigger. I find his top gear is a little bit more powerful. When he really gets going on the rush, he can be a lot to handle. He's this big, strong kid who can just really, fly and be hard to contain when he hits his top speed. He's got a big shot from the point. He's more physical. He's a little bit more of a risk taker, I find. But, his game also lacks a little bit of polish. So there are definitely pros and cons to both of those players. We have Nemec ahead. I like Nemec more, but I also wouldn't be surprised if there were some teams that liked Juracek a little more. I think in the best case scenario, the absolute, ceiling for both players, Juracek is probably a little bit higher. I just think with the extra bit of size and the extra bit of power he brings and, just the confidence that he plays with, if he can round out everything in his game, I think he could be the better player between the two. But I also wouldn't begrudge any team taking Nemec as the safer option between the two, because you know what you're getting. You're getting a guy who's going to be able to play 20 minutes a night easily. He can play on the power play. He should be able to be a penalty killer. He's going to be a consistent force on the back end.
Yeah. And then I guess let's maybe, before we get to the Canucks, we'll focus WHL-wise here. Who would you expect to be the first WHL player taken?
That's a good question. And there are at least, I would say, 4 players, maybe even 5, who really could be in this discussion. At the start of the year, the debate was between Matt Savoy and Connor Geekie for this region. Some people like Savoy better, some like Geekie better. And it was exciting to watch the Winnipeg Ice this season because both players played on the same team. But over the course of the year, some other names really did enter the conversation. Kevin Korchinski had a massive year for the Seattle Thunderbirds. He just skyrocketed up draft boards. He wasn't in our first round right at the start, but he just kept rising and rising and rising throughout the course of the season. He is a very gazelle-like kind of skater. Really exciting to watch. Just tons of natural, unrefined talent. He's so light on his feet. He's got great agility. His edge work is really sharp. His cutbacks, his pivots. He just moves around the ice really, really well. And he's got this great confidence to his puck handling, and the way he sees the ice is really interesting in the offensive zone. He has issues in his transition game. He can be pretty turnover prone at times, but there are just these moments where you watch him at the offensive blue line where he gets the puck and he'll just dissect a team. Like he'll just spin off a forechecker and carry the puck along the wall and then feed a cross-ice pass for a perfect one-time goal. And it's just amazing what he's capable of doing sometimes. And, every time he would get the puck on the blue line, like, okay, like what could happen now? He's got that ability to surprise you, to keep you on your toes, to pull you out of your seat. And there's a lot of room for his game to improve. He's pretty slight right now. He's 6'2", somewhere in that area, and maybe 170, 180 pounds. So he's pretty slight. He's not very strong. There's a lot of strength that he could add onto his body. He seems a little awkward at times. There are certain hitches to his skating stride and his mechanics at times that will need to be worked on. But when you squint really hard, you can kind of see where things could go with him. There's no guarantee that he hits his ceiling. Like I said, with his turnover problems, you worry a little bit about his hockey sense and, how he processes things. But the best case scenario with him is really high. He could be a guy who, if he can work on the defensive side of his game too, will also keep building on his offensive game. he could be a top pair defenseman easily. Someone who transports the puck, someone who is able to quarterback a power play. There's just a lot of tools to his game. He's very toolsy. So there's a lot to like. Matt Savoy is really good. He's another guy who's been on the scene for a long time. There's a lot of information out there about him. People have seen him a lot. Really great shooter, awesome personality, like infectious work ethic. The guy who plays with his heart on his sleeve. He's always moving his feet. He's got a lot of energy. He's got a lot of skill. He's got a lot of smarts. More of a shooter than a playmaker, but he's pretty good at both. And, he racked up a ton of points this year, which is always good to see. The knocks on him is that he's not very big. He's certainly a smaller guy for this draft class, about 5'9". And it's hurt him a little bit. He's been banged up. He's missed time due to injuries. He's fearless. You like that about him. He's not afraid to go into the corners or go to take the puck to the front of the net, but he takes punishment, and you worry a little bit about how well he can handle it. If he was an elite skater, it would make things a little bit different. His skating's good. He's got great acceleration, but his top gear could be a little bit better. There are times where, you see what he's trying to do. You see him try and cut between two defenders or beat a defender wide and just can't quite do it. And once he gets caught, it's not that hard to, take him out of the play, to angle him into the boards or to pin him or just to kind of bottle him up in general. So you worry a little bit about how well he's going to handle that sort of problem at the NHL level. Like even right now, he scores a lot more. Well, technically he scores more at even strength, but a lot of his points are coming from the power play. Even strength is not quite as effective. When he has that extra space on the man advantage, he can do a lot more damage. But, that's something that's more advantageous at the junior level than it is at the NHL. So we'll see. But, Savoy is really likable. I don't think there's a single team that doesn't love him to some degree. Any team would be happy to have him. He's got leadership qualities. He's consistent. He's the type of guy that you want to play with and play for. Connor Geekie is a really big wild card this year. Came into the season with, a ton of hype, a lot of potential. That there's a lot of expectations on him, and his game just didn't really go anywhere. It didn't take off quite as much as people were hoping or expecting. He still had a good year, over a point per game, but there wasn't a ton of growth between his game this year and last year. He's a big body, he's strong, he's got surprisingly soft hands, really deft touch on the puck, really good offensive sense. At his best, he's really dangerous. Just the way he's able to shake off opponents in the offensive zone and protect the puck and, thread perfect passes under pressure to his teammates is really impressive. He can score from distance. He's got a great shot. But he just doesn't always put his tools together quite a lot. There are a lot of times I watched him this season and he steps on the ice and you're hoping for something big to happen. And, he skates a couple laps and doesn't really touch the puck or get near it. And then he goes back off and, you kind of wonder, well, what's he doing? What's going through his mind? Like, why did that happen? He's really streaky. He'd have games where he'd be really good, but there'd be times there'd be one shift where he'd be amazing and he'd be powering up the ice and he could undress a defender one-on-one and thread a perfect pass that would lead to a goal, and then you wouldn't see him the rest of the game. So you worry a little bit about that. His skating's okay. He does get a lot of power behind his stride when he really gets going, and I could see his skating improving. Like there is room for proper skating coaching to fix a lot of his problems, but it's not going to be a strength for him. And that lack of progression throughout this year, it's a little bit worrying. Is he putting in the work? Is he committed to improving that sort of part of his game or his game in general? Or is he kind of, does he already feel like he's done enough? I don't know. He was a frustrating player to watch. We dropped him a lot on our boards. I'm sure some teams are still really high on him. If the best case scenario happens, he's a top 6 center who can play a power game, and those are always in high demand and hard to find. So he'll be someone who's interesting to watch. I expect him to go probably in the high teens, but there's also a chance he could drop because there is a bit of risk to him. Sorry, go on.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I think one of the criticisms that ended up happening with the Winnipeg Ice when they played the Oil Kings in the Eastern Conference Final is the perception that this team was This team got there because of special teams, and this team got bored because they were so good during the regular season. Like, they were so dominant that when they ended up facing the Oil Kings on a best of 7 series, like with that depth of that defense, they just couldn't. They weren't prepared for it.
I don't want to take anything away from Edmonton too on that. I mean,
No.
I really expected Edmonton to win that series. You know, some people thought it could go either way. I was pretty confident in Edmonton just because they were an older team, a lot more experience, you know, guys who'd been to NHL training camps. You know, I think they just had a better idea of what it took. There was a little bit of almost immaturity to Winnipeg's game. You know, great team, a lot of talent, and they just blew teams out of the arena throughout the regular season. But Edmonton's a little bit more polished, a lot more experience, and I think that made more of a difference. But yeah, it's too bad. I was hoping for a 7-game series there that we didn't quite get, but what do you do?
Yeah. Anyway, sorry, I interrupted you. Where were you going?
Oh, I was just going to say that there is one other name, and this is maybe a bit of a long shot, but if a team really wants to take a home run swing in the first round, I wouldn't be all that surprised if Owen Pickering was the first player picked out of the WHL. If you're just looking at best case scenario, long-term development, there's a lot to like about Pickering. He's a huge defenseman who's really fleet of foot. You know, he had a really late growth spurt. So he was already a good, strong skater when he was a smaller guy. Then he added a lot of height to his frame, but he kept a lot of his skating ability. He's really good with the puck. You know, he's got a long reach. His range is incredible. Like, he's a hard player to beat one-on-one because he can skate with the faster players, but he can also kind of win physical battles too. And he's just a guy who's really scratching the surface of what he can do. He played a ton of minutes this year for Swift Current. His game made a lot of progress, and he doesn't even seem like he's close to being finished developing. And Swift Current is kind of a great spot for him right now. You know, he's already their number one defenseman. He's going to be their number one defenseman next year, and he's going to be their number one defenseman the year after that. And they have a really big group of 2004 birthdays on their team. So even though they didn't have a good season this year, they're going to be very good next year and probably pushing for a WHL title 2 years from now. So when you look at the big picture of what it's going to look like for Pickering, you've got a guy who's going to be playing a ton of minutes, top power play, top penalty kill. He's probably going to be on, you know, a playoff push, maybe even playing in the Memorial Cup. You know, you look at the growth potential there, and he's in such a good spot. You know, you saw a few years ago when Detroit took Mo Seider in the first round. It was a surprise pick. You know, a lot of people were really shocked that they took him that high. But you look at what they got. You know, they have a big defenseman who's mobile. He's smart. He can play both ends of the ice. He can handle the puck. You know, Detroit plays him a ton already. They played him a ton as a rookie just because he was so versatile. He could do anything for them. You know, you needed a guy to play on the penalty kill or the power play, or, you know, in a situation where you need to transition the puck up the ice, he can do that. And that's not to say that Pickering is the same caliber of player as Seider, because he's not. But if everything hits just right for Owen, I think you could find yourself having a similar type of player, a guy who could play 20 to 25 minutes per night consistently, and you can kind of play him anywhere in the lineup. Those guys are really hard to find, especially ones his size. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if a team really took a home run swing and took him as high as maybe 8th or 9th or 10th, just because, you know, if he hits, players like that are really hard to find.
Yeah, Craig Button mocked Owen Pickering to the Vancouver Canucks. Interesting, at 15, which I'm sure maybe we should adapt and get what are you, if you're the Vancouver Canucks, where are you thinking at this particular point? I mean, obviously there's a lot of balls in play here. But the suggestion is, of course, there's one part. You mean you're trading. Apparently, some are trading JT Miller for the number 2 pick. We'll leave that for now. But there's suggestion either up, down. Who should be, if you're the Canucks? Who are we looking at here?
Well, the Canucks prospect pool right now is not great. They don't have a ton of high-end talent, and they don't have a lot of depth either. So there are needs in different areas. On one hand, I think it would make sense if they just really aimed at best player available. Don't draft for need. They kind of they could use a young forward. They could use young defenseman. Whoever they have high on their board, if someone is a real standout, and there's a guy that have a few spots higher when they're picking, I think you got to go best player available. But like I said, there's also a lack of depth. So, it's kind of a weird year for the draft. Anywhere from about, 15 to 30, there's a lot of variation. Some guys are as high as 15 on some boards, or in the 30s or 40s on other boards. So maybe it makes more sense for Vancouver if they have a willing trade partner to trade down. Maybe going into the 20s isn't that big of a deal for them. Maybe they have a lot of guys that they like, and maybe they can add another pick in the second round or the third round. They do need to add just more bodies into their system, so they're not having to rely on, signing, free agent players like Philip Johansson they did this past spring. They need to add help in different areas. So maybe dropping down isn't the worst way to do it. And yeah, there might be players taken in the 20s or 30s that are just as good as players taken in the teens this year. It's just that kind of year for the draft.
Yeah. Sean, what are you thinking?
Oh, everything Derek said about Owen Pickering makes me want him. I was unfortunate he was injured, I believe, or just missed the game when I went and watched him Swiftcurrent play the Hitmen in early April, so I wasn't able to watch him live. But yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if the Canucks trade down. Just as Derek said, that seems to be a clump there where they can move down and get value and still get a player that would be comparable. But I don't know. I don't know what to expect from the Canucks this draft, because you've got the JT Miller thing. Does that add a pick to this draft, or do they trade down, or what? But there's a lot of interesting names, and that where they could go, and they've got with Podkolzin, and they've added Kuzmenko, but you also throw in do we think we're going to see some that Russian factor, especially for the players who are playing out of the KHL, to knock them down the draft board?
Yeah, I would be surprised if you didn't see it this year. It's just so bad. I mean, the Russian factor was a thing to a certain degree even before everything that's happened this year, with the invasion of Ukraine, and now all this news about Ivan Fedotov, the Flyers goalie that they'd signed, and who knows what's happening there. He might have been detained by his country. There are reports that he might have been injected with something against his will, and he's been shipped to a military base. Like, it's all really, really up in the air there. It's really concerning. There's already been reports of teams reaching out to their Russian players and be like, hey, like, what's going on? Like, are you sure you can get back? Do you need help getting back to North America? Like, what can we do? So I think it's going to be something that happens. It could work out in some ways for certain teams. If you're a team like Arizona and you've got multiple picks, and someone like Danila Yurov slides a lot, you can get him, later than his talent would suggest. It might work for them, but it's going to be really surprising. I'm very fascinated to see where these players go. I mean, someone like Yurov on paper is a top 10 to top 20 pick. In terms of skill, I'm probably closer to the teens than the tens for me, but he's a really good player. If you had a different passport, I think he'd be in a really strong conversation to go in the top 15, and he might not go in the first round at all, just because there is that uncertainty right now. Ivan Roshnachenko, he is battling cancer right now. He's recovering. That's going to hurt him, but also the fact that he's got a Russian passport, that's not great for him. it's going to be interesting to see. It's not fair to the players, unfortunately. You know, they just want to play hockey. They don't want to have to deal with any of this. But it's going to be hard for teams to not feel nervous about it. There's just so much uncertainty. You know, if you're going to be using a high pick on a player, and like we said, in a draft where there is that clump of players, you know, if you have Yurov on your board at 17, if he's your number 17 guy, and you know you got your number 18 guy right there in terms of skill, you probably go the 18 if the guy plays, you know, for Swift Current or Moose Jaw or, you know, somewhere in North America. So it's going to be an interesting storyline to watch. Keep an eye on that one with Fedotov too. I've been trying to find as much information on that as I can because it's kind of scary what's going on. So I think everyone needs to kind of keep their eyes on where this is going.
Yeah, I saw a story. There was a report he was shipped up to the Arctic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
way up in the north.
Yeah, it's scary. And I mean, next year there's Matvei Michkov, which was expected to be the number 2 pick going into that draft, and I think I'm intrigued what's going to happen there too, because he's a legit talented guy that is going to be, like, after Connor Bedard, it's going to be really hard to pass him up based on his talent, but the passport is the question there.
Yeah, it's looking like there's going to be a big 3 for that draft with Mishkov and then Adam Fantilli. You know, on paper, it's probably a 1-2, and then Fantilli's 3, and then everyone else below him. You know, if you're picking 2 and you pick Fantilli over Mishkov because of, you know, the passport concerns, that's justifiable. Well, if you're drafting 3rd and Mishkov's there, I don't know. But I mean, who knows? Like, a lot can happen between now and then. Hopefully, you know, all this can be resolved in ways that are amicable, you know, with less bloodshed and, you know, players having the freedom to not have to worry about being detained for trying to leave the country. And yeah, it's going to be interesting, not just this year, but potentially next year as well. Yeah, because Mishkov is a dynamic talent.
Yeah. And then outside of the unfortunate situation with the Russians, is there someone you can see that's on your draft board that could slide? Because there always seems to be 1 or 2 players that do that.
Well, Brad Lambert is an interesting name. There's a lot of talk around him. You know, came into the season as kind of a consensus top 5 pick and just kept sliding. And, you know, who knows how far he's going to slide now. You know, he had a trying year. You know, he moved teams. His production got worse. You know, he wasn't the most effective. The points weren't coming. You know, he just didn't have a lot of success. You know, some games he looked really good. A lot of games he didn't look very effective. You know, he's got really great tools. He's a great skater, probably the best in this draft class. He can handle the puck at speed. He's got great control. I think he sees the offensive side of the ice really well at times. But, you know, he had trouble putting all of his tools together into effective results. And it's interesting because with Aatu Ratu the other year, you know, he was someone who was considered a possible top 5 or top 10 pick for a long time. And he slid all the way to the 2nd round. So sometimes once a guy starts sliding, you know, they can slide a lot more than people expect. So I wouldn't be surprised if Lambert slid all the way into the teens or into the 20s. I don't think it's very fair. I mean, I'm pretty high on Lambert still. We at FC Hockey have him in our top 10. You know, we've seen enough of him. We've seen him at his best. We kind of like how projectable the tools are. I think he's a guy who will eventually figure it all out, whether that's staying in Finland or coming to the WHL next year. Seattle just traded for his rights. You know, if they can get him on that roster, put him with, you know, Korchinski and Jordan Gustafson and Reed Schaefer and Thomas Milic. I mean, that could be a really good situation for him. That could be a team who challenges for a WHL title. So it's still too early to write off Lambert, but I also wouldn't be surprised if teams were a little bit hesitant about him. You know, maybe not so much that they dislike him, but, you know, there's other guys who might have passed him, you know, guys who are trending in the right direction, which is something that's important to look for. You know, Lambert was probably overall better last year than he was this year. I mean, the results were different, that's for sure. So you worry a little bit when guys are trending in the wrong direction.
Who is someone, I guess, on the other way of that, who is someone that you think would be a surprise first round pick that it may be a little bit quote unquote off the board?
Yeah, I've got a couple names for that one. One that I wouldn't be surprised about. He's a known quantity now. His name is Maverick Lamoureux. He's a defenseman with Drummondville in the QMJHL. On draft boards, he's more seen as like a second rounder. But like Owen Pickering, he's a guy that I could certainly see teams wanting to have and being willing to take the risk on, especially if they have more than one pick in the first round. He's about 6'6", 6'7" defenseman, a right shot defenseman with really good skating ability and really, really good athleticism. He played a ton of minutes this year for Drummondville, and the results were very hit or miss. He can be very turnover prone at times. He is a little too exuberant at times, taking himself out of position. But there were also these moments where he just looks awesome. He's not afraid to jump up in the rush. He's not afraid to have the puck on his stick. There were times where you'd see him rushing up the ice and beating a defender wide and carrying the puck deep into the offensive zone or carrying it towards the net, which is always really entertaining to see when you're talking about a 6'7" defenseman. Drummondville wasn't very good this year. He didn't have a lot of support, but it might be a good situation for him long term. Like overall, they're not a bad program. They've developed some really good prospects in the last few years. Dawson Mercer came up through there for a while. So in the next 2 years, as the team gets better, they're going to be relying on him a lot. They could be pretty good. So I think he's going to be a guy who teams look at and wonder, like, okay, like where can he go? He's going to be playing 25 plus minutes per night next season and probably the season after. He's going to get chances to practice his ability on the power play and his ability on the penalty kill. And he's going to keep growing into his body. Right now there are times where he looks really awkward, just kind of moving around and trying to coordinate his feet with his hands. But, to have a defenseman like that who can move that well and, he's not bad with the puck and he loves to play physically too. He's got a physical element to his game. So I think a lot of teams would be happy to take him high just because, if things work out for him, you're going to be getting a really good player. One other name that I really like that I don't find people talking about very often, which I'm kind of surprised by. I don't quite understand why, because a lot of the times I've watched him, I've come away really impressed, is Philip Bisted. He is a Swedish center with a really interesting package of tools. I tweeted some video clips of him the other day on Twitter, which if anyone follows me on Twitter, they can go and find. But he's just a guy with a lot of really interesting upside. He's about 6'3" or 6'4", really good, clean stride, good skating mechanics, surprisingly soft hands and good puck skill. He's a good shooter in tight and from distance. He didn't have an overly strong season, but it wasn't bad either. Like he was a point per game player in the Swedish Junior League. He's one of the best players on this team. He played at the top men's level for a while. He was their second line center at the U18 tournament. And even though he wasn't good, he didn't have great line mates to work with. That Swedish team was really reliant on their top line with Lukeramaki and Ugrin and Ostlund. And so he wasn't getting, the prime opportunities, but he's a player that's really interesting. I mean, when you just look at all the tools he has, if you look at the overall package on paper, I'm kind of surprised that more people don't see him as a first rounder or borderline first rounder, because if he's just able to keep growing and developing all the different aspects of his game that are already really good, I think you could have a really special player. I mean, if I was a team with like multiple first round picks, maybe one high, one in the middle, and then one in the late 20s or early 30s. I mean, he's absolutely a guy I would swing on. And I think he's flying under the radar quite a lot this season. That
sounds like a Vancouver pick.
It might be.
They love their Swedes.
If they move down or or add a second round pick or an early second round pick, I think that would be. That definitely feels like an Alvin pick for sure.
Yeah. And then the goalies, I don't see one in a lot of people's top draft board. Is this is there a particular goalie that is going to be up there, or is this not a great year for goalies?
It's not a great year for goalies overall, but at some point you got to draft them. At some point, someone from this class is going to end up as a goalie in the NHL. More likely than not, it'd be really strange if there was just a year where no one came out of it as a hit. Tyler Brennan is interesting. He's probably the top goalie overall on most teams' boards. He's got good size. He's got fairly clean movement in the crease. Technically, he's pretty sound. He can be a little laid back at times, maybe a little slow in his movements and his reactions. But I think teams have a good book on him. He's a late birthday for this draft class. He's been around a little bit longer. Teams have had more chances to see him and kind of pick apart his game. And you give him a little bit of leeway, too, because he plays on Prince George, and they're just not a strong team. They haven't been for a long time. It's hard to get yourself excited for a game if you're just gonna if your team's gonna get doubled in shot attempts, and you're gonna be facing rubber all night. But there were a lot of times where he really did hold them in there. He would face 40 plus shots a night, and he could steal the odd win. He was really good in the playoffs against Portland. Prince George didn't stand a chance. They got badly outplayed, but Brennan really kept them in there. Made a ton of big saves. So it was good to see. It was really nice to see him end his season on a high note. Another goalie that I really like, that it's funny, he might be flying under the radar a little bit, even though he's had big showings on big stages, is Reed Dick with Swift Current. He had a really good showing at the CHL Top Prospects game. He came in the back half of that game and was awesome, made a lot of really big saves. He had some really interesting moments at the U18 tournament with Canada. That team didn't do well. They didn't have a big group of players they could pick from because most of the top players were in the playoffs in the WHL or the OHL. So they had to come with a pretty bare bones team. And they got really caved in on the defensive side of the puck a lot of times. But Reed Dick was just out there just making these 10 bell saves, shift after shift, facing these quality chances and turning them away. He let in a few stinkers too, but when you look at what he can do and you look at the situation he's in, it's really interesting. He's a big goalie. He's athletic. He's pretty quick and coordinated for a goalie his size. I like his poise. I think he thinks the game well. I think he handles pressure well from what I've seen. And you look at the situations with Current, Isaac Poulter was their overage goalie this year. He's aged out of the league. So that net belongs to Reed now. He's going to be their starting goalie. He's going to be playing 40 to 50 or more games per season. Like Pickering, he's a 2004 birthday, so he's probably going to be a part of a Swift Current team that pushes for a WHL title in 2 years. So he'll be playing really meaningful, competitive hockey. So when you look at the whole picture with him, I think he's going to be a goalie who makes a lot of progress over the next few years. His numbers this year weren't great, but I think he's going to be a guy who, like a Matt Murray maybe, where he wasn't great necessarily in his draft year, but you saw the things that he could do, and then he started doing them. Even though Murray is fallen on some hard NHL times, he's still a goalie. He won Stanley Cups. He had a lot of success. So you got to look at the big picture and where these guys could be in the future and where their games can still grow, not necessarily where they are right now.
Yeah. It's I'm glad you brought up that name, because I remembered him from the Prospects game, and I kind of just, because I've been focused on other things, I forgot about him. But yeah, I'm glad you brought him up, because I think it's an interesting name. Is there anything else we need to touch on? I know you have a limited time. Is there any other topics we need to touch on?
That's a good question. Do we want to talk Calgary Flames or?
Yeah, let's do that. I think the couple of names I heard the name Adam Sikora as one name. I may be spitballing, but maybe the name Fraser Minton might fit there as well. What are you thinking for the Flames' perspective?
I mean, Minton would be a Kamloops connection. They've already got Connor Zary in the system. But on the flip side of that coin, Minton and Zary have a lot of similarities to their game. So, do you want too much of one thing in your prospect pool, or do you want to branch out a little bit more? Do you remember exactly where the Flames are picking this year? Like what numbers?
72nd, I believe.
72nd. So
let me confirm that, but yeah.
It's not a bad spot to be in. I think there's going to be almost more balance of talent throughout the second and third rounds than something in the first. I think there's going to be decent talent in the second and third that are still available. I don't think the Flames have a lot of right shot defensemen in the system. So I could certainly see that being something that they look at if they're looking for a need. And there could be some guys around there that would be good fits. Maybe someone like Elias Salomonson, a Swedish defenseman who was a possible first rounder coming into the season. He had a good 16-year-old season in Sweden. His stock slid a lot, but he could be one of those guys who just has an off year and then bounces back to what his true potential really is. He's interesting. Maybe someone like Thomas Hamara, who was a point per game player for the Czechs at the U18 tournament. He's pretty good. He's a right shot, puck moving defenseman. Sikora would be really good too. He almost flew under the radar a little bit this year. And he had a really good season. He was playing in the top pro league in Slovakia. He was playing at the World Championships, but he didn't get as much attention as a lot of the other big names for the Slovaks with Nemec and Slavkovsky and Philip Misar. So he might be flying under the radar a little bit, but he's really talented. He's a good offense first winger. I think he's got a pretty good defensive game as well. He's skilled, he's quick, he plays with a good pace, he's got a good work ethic. He's a very projectable kind of forward, especially as someone who we've already seen playing against men and, holding his own. So that's always a good sign when you're seeing that out of a 17-year-old, especially when he's younger for this draft class. So, yeah, I think he'd be a really interesting pick for Calgary, but they're going to have to be careful with, not having high picks and having a limited number of the picks they do have. They'll have to be really careful about, what they do with what they have.
Yeah, sorry, that's 59th, 155th, and 219th. So, but
yeah, better than.
Yeah, 3 picks. It's yeah. I don't expect. Yeah, I mean, I'm not really. It's tough because I'm not really expecting a lot from the Flames in this draft. I think the big question with the Flames isn't the draft. I think with the Canucks, it's more. I mean, Sean may disagree. I think there's more questions fair with the draft with the Canucks. The Flames, the big question is the players on the roster right now. I think that's where the focus is a bit more, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when you've got a player like Johnny Gaudreau who is kind of taking his time and maybe seeing what's out there, that could be a franchise altering change if something doesn't go right for the Flames there.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. Sean, did you have anything else or?
No, I think we've got a lot there. I'm definitely looking forward to Thursday and seeing what happens. And there's going to be fireworks. We all know that. And Gary, I think is out of is over his COVID spell and will be. I've got a trade to announce.
Yeah.
We can go back to one of the tried and true traditions in hockey and the booing of Gary Bettman.
Yeah.
Yep. Nature will be healing.
Yes. Derek, thank you so much. For those who don't know, tell everyone where we can find you.
Yeah, the best place to find me is on Twitter. It's Derek_N_NHL. I'm pretty active on there. Mostly talk of prospects in the WHL. A lot of Dallas Stars prospects talk and Dallas Stars NHL talk because I used to write and cover the team for a long time. But just general draft stuff. I'll be in Montreal in a few days. I'll be tweeting a lot from behind the scenes and in and around the arena. So I think I'm going to try and find lots of interesting content to share. And actually, I will be. I don't think it's been fully announced anywhere yet, but I might be on the radio come Thursday night during the first round. So I will I'll keep that under wraps for right now, but
Okay.
I'll share the details on Twitter once things are officially confirmed. So you might be able to hear me give you my analysis on the picks as they come in on the first round.
Okay, that's awesome. That's great news. I'm glad to hear that. I don't know wherever you're staying, but if you're staying with someone, make sure that they give you a key so you don't have to break in the middle of the night. Tyler, last couple years ago, who stayed at my house and had to break in. Anyway, yeah, that was my fault. Yeah. But Derek, thanks so much for doing this. We really appreciate it. Sean, how do we follow you?
I am BeardyConnect03 on Twitter.
Tyler, as mentioned, is TNOBLE. Chris is Schneid's, SCHNEIDZ. Devin, Gordhouse09. Gallivanting in a robe around Berlin. Berlin is Devin right now. I am KEVOLE. Shifts and Pucks, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, wherever you get your audio, as well as on the Area 51 Sports Network. Thanks, everyone, for watching and listening. We'll talk to you all very soon. Bye for now. We got to do the wave.